Flex. With these utilities, we can quickly manage the layout, alignment and sizing of grid columns, navigation, components and more. Here we see our reference section with the different Flex utilities applied. We can see that our red elements are having different alignments throughout the page. You should compare the red element to the gray background. We'll go through all of these in CodePen in just a moment. This is just to get an overview of what we want to code. So in our CodePen we have all the markup from the practice section. To work with Flexbox, we first need to create a Flexbox container, which will turn the direct children elements into flex item. To do this, we use the class dFlex to create a normal Flexbox container. So I'll just write this here, dFlex. To create an inline flex container, we have the class Inline Flex. With my custom CSS down here, I've given the gray background to these Flexbox containers. This is not something that happens by default. Okay, so now we want to control the direction of the flex items. So in our next code block, I'll just add the dFlex container as well. And now we can set the direction of these flex items to be row, which is also the default. If we want a reverse order, we can use the class flex row reverse, like so. And if we want it to be stacked as columns, we can use the class flex column. And as a reversed column, we can use the class flex column reverse. We cannot see this actually change, but if we open the developer tools, we'll see here that we have these three classes having the reverse order in the window here. Great. The same thing is true with these row reverse class. Alright, so now we'll see how we can justify the content. I'll just select all these code blocks at the same time. First we need to create the flex container, and then we want to use the class justify dash content and then our value. So for the first one, we'll align it to the start, and the next one should be aligned to the center. The third one should be aligned to the end. We can see this right here, the start, the center, the end. The fourth one, we want to align it with the justify content between, which means that the empty space will fill in between the elements. And the last one, is justify content around where the available space will be distributed between and outside the elements. We can also align our items. Let's just select these 5 code blocks. Once again, we have the class dFlex, and then we use align dash items dash and then our value. So for the first one, we add the start. Now we can see the items are aligned at the beginning of this container. So this is the opposite direction of justify content. Before we had justify content working on the horizontal direction, and now we have align items working on the vertical direction. If we had a flex direction of column instead of row, this would be the opposite. So it can be a little tricky to understand at first, but you just have to try it. The next one will be aligned at the center, right here. Our third one will be aligned at the end, right there. Our fourth one will be aligned at the baseline. So this is at the top. And the third one would stretch, which is the default. So that was also what we saw before. Okay, we can also align self, which means we can align an individual flex item. The classes we've used until now has all been on the flex container. Now we will apply some classes to some flex items. First, we'll just turn these code blocks into flex containers by adding the class dFlex to them. So it starts right there. Okay. Now for our first flex item, the first code block, we add the class align self start. We now see that it's aligned at the start, which is the top of our current direction. So this is the same from before, but it's just only working on the flex items and not all of the flex items. So next one should be align self center, then align self end, and then we have align self baseline, and finally we have align self stretch. All right, let's have a look at those. Here we are. We have the align self start, the align self center, the align self end, the align self baseline, and the align self stretch. So that was how that works. Now let's look at horizontal auto margins with justify content. We start with adding our flex containers here, like so. Oops, dFlex. And then we use justify content start for the top one and end for the second one. What we have here is these two rows. Now we want to apply a margin left auto for the third flex item in the first flex container. And for our second flex container, we apply the class MR auto for a right margin on the first flex item. So here we can see that this margin left auto pushes the other two flex items to the left, and in the bottom we see that our margin right auto pushes the last two flex items to the right. We can do something similar with vertical auto margins. So we'll just establish the flex container by adding the class dFlex, and then we'll give the direction flex column, and then the align items class with the value for the first one being start and for the second one being end. So it looks like this. Okay, for the first flex item in our first flex container, we add the class margin bottom auto, MB auto. And for our last flex item in our second flex container, we add the class MT auto, which is margin top auto. If we scroll down, we can see it does the same thing. The margin bottom auto on our first flex item pushes the last two flex items to the bottom. And here, our margin top auto on our last item pushes the first two flex items to the top of the container. Alright, let's look at wrapping. First, we create the flex container, and then we can use the class flex no wrap to not make the items wrap. So if we narrow the window, no matter how narrow, they will never wrap onto a new line. However, if we instead use the class flex wrap, they will wrap. So we can see here that they start to wrap when we narrow our browser window. We can also use the class flex wrap reverse, which will reverse our order of the wrapping elements. So we can see no elements wrap right now, but when we narrow browser window, they start to wrap, but in the reverse order. Cool. Now let's see how we can change the order of our flex items. First, we establish the flex container with the class dFlex. We can set the order with values from 1 to 12. So this is similar to our 12 column grid. Let's try to set the order to the last one using the class order-12, and then set the order to the first one using the class order-1. Now we can see that we have our last flex item appearing as the first one because it didn't have an order. So you can say that the order is 0 as a default. Then we have our second item appearing before our first item because the values we gave to them makes them change place in the order. So we have 12 different values which we can use to arrange and order our items. Great. Now we want to look at the last Flex utility we can use, which is align content. First, I'll select these 5 code blocks and create the Flex container like so. We'll also use the class Flex wrap so we can see these examples better. Whoops, we had one more down here. Alright, so for our first one we use the class align content start. Now we can see that we have our content aligned to the start, which is the top of our container. We can also use the class align content center, align content end. Let's have a look. So we have the center alignment and the end alignment, which is in the bottom. We can also use the class align content between and align content around. Now we see the align content between here and align content around here. This is similar to the values for justify content, but our last value is similar to the one from align items, because we can say align content stretch. So we can see that it stretches. If we didn't use the class Flex wrap for these examples, we would not be able to make use of our align content utility, because the Flex items wouldn't wrap to new lines. We can also use responsive utility classes for all the Flexbox utilities. Let's just look at some examples. Here in the top we have our Flex row reverse. So let's say we only want this to apply for large devices. Now we can see that our row is not reversed in a narrow viewport. When we increase it, we can see that the Flex utility starts working from large devices and up. Another example would be justify content. Let's say we only want the justify content between to work at extra large devices. So now there's nothing justified here. When we go to extra large devices, we can see that it starts happening. We can even combine these. So we want it to be justified end initially. Now it's being justified at the end here. And when we increase it, we have the justify content between being applied. Let's just look at one more example from our align items center. So we'll do that from small devices and align it to the end for medium devices. So first we'll look at this code block right here. So it has the default value, which is stretch, and when we go to small screen size, like so, the align items SM center starts working, and when we go to a medium viewport, it will start align to the end. This is how you use the responsive utility with Flex utilities.